us who have nothing really to do with agriculture. I like your metaphor too, because I think we're really all just stewards for Maine in this special place, and you can really extend what you're saying to all of us and our responsibility. So our next storyteller is Sarah Loftus. Sarah is an archaeologist at Northeast Archaeology Research Center in Farmington. She moved to Maine 3 years ago to learn how to farm and spent 2 years working on vegetable and dairy farms before returning to history last summer to help MFT document the story of Rolling Acres Farm to the Joseph A. Fiore Art Center. So, Sarah, please.
Hi, I'm Sarah. It's great to be here, and these last two stories were wonderful. Thanks, Chan and John, for sharing. Just realized, like, the first part of my story was just told, but yeah, I decided I wanted to be a farmer like 3 years ago, and at the time I was living in Austin, Texas, and working for an engineering firm as an archaeologist. And I was also at the tail end of trying to finish a PhD. And I'm not a farmer today. I would love to. It's not that kind of success story. But I would love to have some land at some point. But what I wanted to share with you guys tonight is kind of more of the story of what led me to decide to try farming and how that decision sort of unexpectedly led me back to history and archaeology and kind of reignited this passion that I'd really lost. And I think that sort of the decision had been evolving for a while. It was sort of this deep need that I think a lot of us have to connect with the land because we're so disconnected. And but I think sort of the immediacy of that feeling for me really came on from research that I was doing for my dissertation. And for the past 4 years prior to moving up here, I'd been researching the history of an African-American farming community in East Texas, and it's a community that developed after the Civil War during the Jim Crow era, during this period of incredible racial oppression and violence. And what I was trying to do was kind of look at how over generations these farmers had worked together to buy land and build community in this sort of really brutal context of American history. And kind of part of what I was doing for that research was using archaeology just as a way to look at daily life and the objects of daily life and how we interact with those things that are in our lives and how that shifts and changes over generations or stays the same. And so I was spending a lot of time out in this community. And so I got to know people in the community, and one of the guys that I got to know pretty well was this man, Douglas Carter, and his family had a couple hundred acres out there. They'd been farming forever, and his great-grandfather was one of the founders of the local church. And he would come out to one of the sites that I was excavating sometimes, and I usually worked out there alone and have like a whole lot of research money, and he would come by, and I think it was almost like to check on me, which was kind of nice. And he came by the site this one day, and it was the site was this kind of like overgrown patch of woods and poison ivy, like down this old country road where an old farmstead used to be. And he came out one day, and I was sort of standing like usual around like a number of square holes with piles of dirt everywhere. And I was covered in dirt and sweat, and at this point, rather frantic and trying to finish this end goal of a dissertation that was feeling increasingly detached. And I think I often looked fairly ridiculous. And we'd become friends by this point. He kind of looked at me and he was like, you know, you should have been a farmer. And his words, he was kidding, but his words really stuck with me. And I guess it was about a year later, and I'd finished my field work, and I was sitting at my desk in this engineering firm in Austin, and his words just kept coming back to me. And I decided that he was right, that I should be a farmer, which is a very logical decision. But so I went home and I looked into MOFGA apprenticeships because I have family that's up here in Maine. And I really wasn't sure if anybody would hire you know, a 36-year-old who grew up in central Houston with absolutely no farming experience, but Laura Neal, who's over at Black Kettle Farm in Lyman, which isn't that far from here, gave me a shot. And so I moved up to Maine, I left my job, and I started learning how to grow food. And after that first season at Black Kettle, I ended up moving to Unity, and I worked at Misty Brook, and I worked at Ironwood, and Misty Brook is a dairy farm, and Ironwood is a horse-powered vegetable farm. And I just kind of put history and archaeology and writing away for about 2 years, and I just worked, and it was incredibly nourishing and empowering, and also hard and exhausting, as everybody knows farming is, and a huge learning experience. I mean, I think our relationships with nature just become so, especially our modern relationships, become so much more clear on a farm. And I guess it was the following winter, I was living up kind of the Blue Hill Peninsula Harborside at Four Season Farm, and I was trying to learn how to do winter vegetable production. And I saw that Maine Farmland Trust was looking for somebody to write the history of Rolling Acres Farm. And Rolling Acres Farm is this like beautiful piece of land in Jefferson that's right on Damariscotta Lake. And right now it's the home to the Joseph Fiore Art Center, which does this amazing artist in residency program. And at this point it's like deep winter, and I'm living in this little cabin next to the greenhouse at Four Seasons, and very cold and tired, and history is sounding really good, so I applied. And I can still remember when I got the letter from MFT saying that I could have the opportunity, because I was actually using my mom's mailing address, and she called to tell me, and I was like outside chasing like 20 escaped chickens across frozen fields. And so yeah, so so that next summer I ended up living at Rolling Acres Farm in Jefferson for 6 weeks, sort of doing the research and trying to write the story of this farm. And when I first got there, Anna, who's like the amazing co-director of the Joseph Fiore Art Center, she's MFT's gallery director, was sort of showing me around the land. And she took me down into the old cow tie-up, which is in this like huge 19th century barn that's still out there. And the cow tie-up is this, it's been converted into a garage more recently, so it's sort of this like dark, almost dungeony kind of space, and sort of sneak in there. And it like takes a second for your eyes to sort of adjust, but once they do, you're facing, there's all these old tools and all this old farm equipment just kind of staring up at you from the dirt and from the manure that's still, you know, housed down there. And kind of an archaeologist like dream, it's already like excavated mostly. But so Anna was like, you know, if you want to play with this stuff, feel free to come down here and work with it. If you want to incorporate it, like come use this space, whatever. And I was like, great. And I don't know why, but it took me a couple weeks to actually go back down there. And but when I did, I grabbed Nellie Sweet, who was the gardener in residence that summer, and I think we like took a couple beers and went down into this cow tie, and we just started pulling out all these old tools, and just sort of like glinting up at you from the dust, and the barn floor is just like concrete, and we're just laid them out on this concrete slab, and it's hard to sort of describe the feeling, but it was like this overwhelming sense of life and the sense of movement and labor, and it was like all the kind of like objectivity and functionality that I had focused so hard on through my academic life as an archaeologist sort of just like fell away, and all these direct experiences that I'd had the last couple of years with farming and with farms sort of stepped in. And it was like there were like a bunch of scythe blades that were kind of laying around in the dirt, and they had this like fluidity to them. And there was like a broken shovel that had been tossed in the corner, and you could still like feel this like sense of frustration that somebody had, and this, you know, handle snapped. And there were all these old dismantled stove parts that were kind of laying around in the dirt, but you could still feel this sort of sense of warmth around them from where they've been feeding a family for decades. And so I kind of, after that, I went back inside and I kind of, continued researching the history of this piece of land, this farm in Jefferson, but it was with this new sense of these very real people that had lived there, and this, these past generations who, made a go on this land. And the more I got into the research and the history, the more I kept seeing how much there is just on this one piece of land. And there's an archaeological record of the land where the Wabanaki and the ancestors of the Wabanaki have left behind pieces of stone tools and fragments of pottery. And you can see the history of colonization in that tragedy, and you can see the clearing of forests and the building of stone walls and lumber and shipping and all these events. And you can see the history of the Hall family, who's the first family who moves there in the 1820s as this young married couple and builds this little cape that's still sitting there today, and it's now like the Joseph Fiore Art Gallery. And you can see the story of how they managed to figure out how to survive and raise a family on this piece of land, and supplementing, self-sufficiently, and then supplementing that income with like a little bit of carpentry work for shipping in Dharmascotta, and orcharding, and wool. And you can see the history of the Civil War on the land as 3 of the Hall sons died, leaving the farm and going down south to fight for the Union in places like New Orleans and Florida and Virginia. And you can see also, and I think you see this a lot today, the generational struggle and the financial struggle to pass the farm down to the next generation. And it's still there in these old cursive wills and probates that are still housed at the Wiscasset courthouse. And then you can see the Great Depression, and you can see the end of this way of life that depended on self-sufficiency. And all these micro events that are so hyper-local, but are also so, I think, reflective of our shared history here in America, both the beautiful and the painful, and that are reflecting, the story of this one farm, Rolane Acres, but are also our stories, which are so connected. And I think what I think is so incredible about the Rolane Acres farm is that connection piece, and seeing that today as it's sort of settling into this new role as this space, this incredible space where we can all come together and kind of from different walks of life and with different perspectives and different ideas about food and different histories related to food, and talk about that and come together and then sort of look at where we're moving forward in our relationships to the environment within this setting. So it's just an incredible place. And so for me, I think I'm still, very much on this journey with history and with farming, kind of the beginning of the farming journey, but I know now that it's really rooted in this very generational community. And in this, and I think you were talking about this earlier, this sense of self-empowerment that we can all get from connecting with the land and with the earth, whether you're in Texas or in Maine, and the humility that learning about farming and then learning about history can bring all of us. So, that's my story.